Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Embrace You First. Last week, we released a topic that could be fear triggering on human trafficking with Evan DeMarco. It was podcast number 15 called Mia and the Go Away Monster Spray. And in addition to that, we are in the middle of a pandemic. So we thought that what better time to cover the topic of fear? Essentially, what is the impact it has on us, the solutions around fear, the top fears, and even down to this podcast and how we came about. We overcome our fears around certain little things that come up around fear. We'll talk a little bit about, give you some laughter throughout. So before we get started, I really want to share this poem. It's by Marianne Williamson, and it was said in a speech by Nelson Mandela, and it goes like this. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, fabulous? Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God or the universe if you're not religious. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that other people won't feel insecure around you. We are all meant to shine. As children do, we were born to make manifest the glory of God or the universe that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we're liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. How cool is that? I love that poem.
I love it. Thank you so much for sharing that, because I haven't seen it or heard it. And it's really wonderful because, of course, our automatic response to fear is, it's like the dark side. And we're, wanting to allow people to see the other side, the good coming from fear and how we can be in resolve through fear. Now, did we cover and mention about last week's episode about me?
Yeah, we did, definitely. It was such a kind of a spooky episode, to be honest. As I was sitting in it with you guys, I was thinking, wow, what does the world come to? And I figured we really need to address some of the fear that comes around that kind of concept, or just how to handle fear. Because fear, you can't just run from it. You kind of have to sit with it, process it, and move through and then past it. Otherwise, sitting in it can create a lot of body symptoms, physical issues. And what is fear? Fear is basically, do you want to define it from the traditional Chinese?
So I just want to go back really quickly when you said, we don't run away from it. Well, the truth is a lot of people do run away from fear. They suppress. Right?
Yes.
And so, when you ask about what is fear, so even the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it defines it as an unpleasant and often strong emotion caused by anticipation or awareness of danger or threat. So meaning,
right.
It's in the present moment, but then we have anticipatory stress. Like, in COVID times, we are fearful of catching COVID or having ourselves or loved ones get really sick or die, right? And then there's, as you mentioned last week's episode, when we're talking about trafficking, right? It's like, oh my gosh, like that is just one of our deepest fears as well. And so it's not about being able to get rid of fear. That's not what this episode's about, right?
Right.
We are human. We experience fear.
Instinctually, it drove us back in Stone Age time to protect our family and run from big, scary, threatening animals, right? So we can't just stand there and freeze. I mean, that is one response, but it is better to fight or flight, right?
Yeah. And that is definitely appropriate. Like fear is there for a reason. So measures, and this is done innately. Like it's not like, do I think about this when someone's chasing after me? It's like, no, I just run.
Yes, it's innate. Right? It's instinctual. Absolutely. And it's what fires us. It's what gets us going, sometimes like it gets us, like we could have just sat and said, I have so much to offer the world and so many things to say, but, and I want to do this podcast, but I'm too scared to do it because I worry about judgment, which is why I love that poem. Because it's like, what? But when we offer really good information and can share and get our all that we've learned across the world, and we're empowering other people to do the same. Like that whole concept of just let go of fear. And actually, before we hopped on this podcast, you're going pee, I'm going poo. Like we have different responses as to how our body reacts in a moment of, before we hop on here. We don't talk about this stuff, but it's, before I went on TV back in the past, I would always be looking for the toilet. I'd have to make sure I knew where the toilet was. It wasn't always there. And I was sometimes just like, okay, when's this episode going to be over? Cause I gotta go.
Oh my gosh. That is so funny. And for me, same thing. It's like, I have to go to the toilet, but it's number one.
Right. So, yours is a lot easier. You could just get that Uresta little plug and just like hold it there. It'll, you won't leave.
Well, I get that. And so, the point in all this is that fear, we actually feel it as an emotion, but there's a huge physiological component, right? So you go poo, I go pee, I get cold. So hence I brought this. So it's not like we're stopping.
I have my dog blanket, which doesn't really smell that nice, but it's okay. It's my doggie. She's so cute.
Oh,
yeah. So it's really like it. Yeah. So basically like when you're in fear mode, if it's really high fear, you sometimes aren't even you're not processing. You're stuck in your amygdala, which is basically the center that kind of creates the response. So it's like the fight or run mode, and your heart rate goes up, your blood pressure goes up, you might sweat, you're definitely not digesting your food, like you're not in processing and that. So one of the most helpful techniques I always talk to patients about who have anxiety and panic is just be very in touch with your five senses, right? We've talked about that before, and we'll definitely talk about that in further, like bigger detail, but like the 555s, and my sister talks about it a lot too, which actually we're going to have her on as a guest kind of go.
Yes. I want to hear her story for sure.
Her story and how she's moved past fear. But the 5-5s are basically like, what are your five senses?
Oh, you're asking me now.
Yeah, why not?
I'm
Make it easy.
Yes, I'm just nodding.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's five senses.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because in the next episode actually, I don't know when it's coming out, but we're going to talk about connection, and I want to speak more to five senses as well. Right. So, sure. But that's okay. I think we all need to know about our five senses. So,
we can use it across the board.
You see, so there's sight and there's sound, hearing, right? Yeah. Smell, taste, and touch.
Right. So the 5-5s are look around the room and find, for example, 5 things that are your favorite color. So you're trying to ground yourself and take yourself out of amygdala and into the processing part of your brain to get rid of the panic, and so that you can move past, like basically get out of panic and ground yourself. So 5 things that you see in the room that are your favorite color. 5 tastes, like think about 5 tastes that, remind you of something pleasant. So for me, for example, would be like a cup of coffee, or the taste of chocolate or cinnamon, and smells might be like cloves in an orange. So,
or lavender.
It's like your favorite, 5 of your 5s. So essentially it helps you to process, but before you even process, you have to recognize that you even have fear in the first place. So labeling it.
Yes, absolutely.
Right. So it's like, I have anxiety. I am in panic. Because sometimes people don't even recognize, they just think that there's something physiologically wrong with them. They think, oh my gosh, I'm having a heart attack.
So you know what, I'm going to, it's really, really great. So I love that you say this, and we need to distinguish. So it's like, I feel fear versus I am fearful.
Yeah.
Right. Because it's a feeling, and you are not fear itself.
Right.
There's a difference. So semantics is everything, right? Because as we know, and in research, they see it too, right? Epigenetics. It's like what we think, and we, assimilate it like it's our truth, and it can impact our physiology as well. So if you don't own your fear, like, oh my gosh, like this is who I am, and just actually articulate it in a way, it's like, in this moment, I feel fear.
Right. I could think I have irritable bowel, like an irritable bowel, for example, is like, partly neurological too. Like it's like if you're nervous, you're anxious, your irritable bowel may aggravate. You might not just be a food sensitivity causing bowel movements that are frequent or irritated or just have to go. And I think that the level of nervousness will predict the type of bowel movements or bowel movements. But patients talk to me about it all the time. So now they get to hear me talk about it. And I don't normally have irritable bowel, but I could think that I have, like, if I was perhaps, like always, like if I didn't do podcasts and do public speaking, I mean, this has been going on since I was a kid. I would do public speaking competitions and I would go up on stage in front of the whole high school. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I have to go to the bathroom first. And so I would have thought I could have thought maybe there was something wrong with my gut if I didn't recognize, oh, I actually have a little anxiety before I go in front of 500 people and talk. So I think it's really important to recognize that your anxiety can manifest as a physiological symptom. Yes. Like it could be chest pain or heartburn or arm pain, and just recognizing that and then saying, in that moment, I have anxiety for whatever's going on. And then once you label it, and when you're mad, like have you ever been mad? I like to use this example. And then instead of just being in mad, you say, I'm mad. And all of a sudden it tones you down. You can say, I'm mad. And then all of a sudden you're less mad. So
right. You're articulating it. Well, yes. And I will still choose a different word though, instead of I am. It's good. Like I'm feeling mad.
I feel mad, right? Because you're not. You're
not, because
you're not mad, crazy. Yeah. You're just feeling mad.
Yeah, it's in that moment.
That's really
you're
good
feeling
addition. Thank you for that.
Right. So you don't want to own it like that's who you are.
No,
it's not like
I'm feeling mad
24/7. Yeah.
Yes, I love that. Yes. So label the feeling and
label. Yes, absolutely. So now I want to just go through with everyone in terms of, what are we fearful of? And especially during these crazy times, it's really interesting. So in the show notes, we'll put up some of the research articles, but in psychology, we talk about even how fear can hold people back. So we want to look at, what these fears are. Like, because, yes, we know that the pandemic raises fear, but really
social media is huge for fear, right? You could sit there scrolling on Instagram, watching TV, and it's even just, we're just inundated by fear.
Yes. But, we got to look at, well, what are we fearful of though, through when we have the media that is causing the shock and the fear triggering things, right?
Well, change.
So there's 10 So change is for sure one of them. And for sure right now we're freaking going through a huge amount of change globally,
I know. Right. And it's hard to accept, right? Like, it's like, it's one thing to be like, oh, you're in lockdown for 2 weeks. Okay, great. And then people are then thinking, okay, now this is now getting extended. And then when we're finally released from our cages of our homes, now it's like that we're back in lockdown. That's a big change. So it's like, how do you kind of move through that and just adapt?
And then so segue into then, because gosh, like there's a huge amount of uncertainty and there's a lack of control, right? So that's the second one, right? And then the third one is, oh my gosh, impact of loneliness. We're all being isolated.
Yeah. And if you're not, with children, married, and, if you're on your own, like literally on your own in your own space, that's hard. I mean, right? Like if you're, or on the other hand, there's a higher incidence of, relationship issues, I guess, because now you're just only in each other's space. Right.
Yeah. And then there's a flip side because, you have, then if you're in an unhealthy relationship or in COVID, there may also be a fear of then actually being alone and leaving the relationship.
Right. Because then what? You're
right.
Gonna be on your
so
own.
There's a fear of staying, and then there's a fear of leaving. Like you get stuck. It's cool.
Yeah, because you can't reach out to your usual social support network in these types of scenarios right now with COVID. It's challenging to move, right?
Yes.
So although housing and real estate's like, whew, that's really hot right now.
Yes, that's probably
Lots of
one of the
sales.
reasons too. Yeah, yeah, for
Maybe,
sure.
maybe.
They were part of the essential services to real estate agents right from the get-go because of
Yeah.
the issues with relationships and, well, never mind and job and unemployment and stuff like that.
Yeah, possibly people can't afford their mortgage anymore.
Yes,
Right?
yes. So that raises
So that,
another thing, and like the third one. So we talked about change, we talked about uncertainty, and the third one is failure, right? We have fear of failure.
right. Yeah.
And
Stopping you from trying anything new. Like if you're not happy, perhaps in your job, and now COVID hit, it's like, well, now you're afraid not just about change, but like, what if you quit this job and fail, and then you're totally right, spent, done,
totally.
no income.
And then the next one is rejection, right?
Right.
We love, well, and I imagine there's a lot of people that are people pleasers watching this. So we often just say yes to everything, and we fear saying no, because then we can go back to the, oh gosh, maybe people will reject me, right?
Yeah, I think it's so important to set boundaries, because then you show up happy for those people. And I think if you set the boundary in a healthy way, they respect that, definitely. But I get, yes, definitely rejection, uncertainty, loneliness, you mentioned. And then something bad will happen. That's a huge one, especially health anxiety, something bad, like, I mean, around COVID, but it spiked a lot of beyond just COVID, but feeling anxious about your own health now.
Yes.
What if you get sick and you end up in the hospital? You might get COVID, or you might not get the care you need. So
yes,
it's yeah, something bad will happen.
Totally.
Something bad did happen.
Yes, of course. But then it kind of rules us in our choice. So for example, I won't say names, but I know someone who said, Mary, I'm really not seeing anybody because I'm a single income. I'm the only provider, and I have 2 young kids. So I don't want to see anybody, because if anything happens to me, I can't take care of my kids.
Right.
So she's not going out. She's not seeing anybody. And I'm like, oh my gosh. So that's tough.
Yeah.
The impact is so real. Anyway, okay. So let's move on. And then the fear of getting hurt. Right. So, and in parenting, we can overprotect our children, for example, right? And like, you don't want them to hurt because we want to protect.
So we might shelter them, but I think it's really important. Yeah. Like, just wait, we don't shelter ourselves. We have to learn what is the feeling, and then moving through it and past it. Yeah. So fear of getting hurt is definitely a big one.
Yes.
As parents, but as just in general, as humans, even delivering information to somebody that would probably in the end benefit them, you're afraid to tell them because you don't want to hurt them. So yeah, it is a huge one. The fear of getting hurt, fear of being judged, which we talked about in that poem. All right. The Nelson Mandela speech by Marianne Williamson. I think that's such a big one, because as women, we're like people pleasers, and we're always trying to make sure that, we're perfect, and we don't want to be judged. But I think the less we judge, I love the 4 agreements by Miguel Ruiz. And
yes, love that.
One of his agreements is do not gossip, like, so hold your truth and just speak nice. And when you don't judge other people, you worry less about other people judging you as well, because, just loving, and admiring other people for what they're doing, and then seeing them shine. And then it gives you that ability to shine too. And it's just like that nice ripple effect. I love it.
Yes. And so now you're actually talking about the tactical measures while we're talking about it, but that's okay. That's okay as we go. Because, here's the thing about, we fear about what other people think. And then the next one, we also fear about not being good enough. So it's stop us, right? So it's like, okay, so I'll do nothing at all. I'll be paralyzed and I'll be numb, and I just won't move. Right. And yet we know that if we get stuck in paralysis, how's that going to help forward our lives and other people's lives?
Yeah.
Right. So it's like, how can we step outside of that? And we'll talk more about, our tactics. Right.
Right.
And then, so the last one is loss of freedom. And certainly with, fear of COVID, and now we're living so many of these points. Like
we have lost
right?
so much freedom, to
Yes.
do everything that, there's a lot left over, the basics, essentials, things that are fun, but there's a loss of so much,
Yes.
just talking about not being able to go to the gym this morning and my usual routine and they used to do. And just like the freedom. I mean, even going into the winter, I was bike riding in the forest. That was my go-to. It was my little magical moment every morning. Now, it's a little cold and wet, so not really happening, but loss of freedoms. You have to find ways to adapt so that you don't feel stuck and caged up.
Yes. So, I mean, the point in all that is there is no lack of fear in our lives.
No, there are so much.
And we're bombarded every single day, and there's reminders every single day. So so when we talk about this episode of overcoming fear, it's not about, again, as I said, not getting rid of it, because it's always going to be there. It's just how we be around the fear, right?
And
let that be a shining, like a guide, as a guardian, and as an opportunity to rise above. Right.
And I think people worry a lot about the impact that fear will have. And yes, of course, it's going to manifest in your physical body if you don't address it. But again, it's addressing it and then recognizing. We talk a lot about adrenal fatigue as naturopathic doctors. The interesting thing with adrenal fatigue, it's your adrenals will never fatigue. It's actually brain fatigue.
Thank you.
So
Thank you for making that distinguishing.
Yeah, because when you have an external stress, your brain sees that stress as threatening, and then your brain tells your adrenals to release some cortisol. Your noradrenaline goes up. You're like a little bit, fight or flight mode. And then your adrenals kind of pump out cortisol. What happens is there's actually a negative feedback to the brain that says, that's a lot of cortisol. You need to chill out, brain. Stop perceiving the world as stressful. So then that negative feedback from the adrenals can sometimes even affect your memory center. You feel a bit foggy, exhausted.
Yes.
That is actually when you start to go into what we sometimes as NDs call adrenal fatigue. But again, it's just brain fatigue, because then the brain says, okay, I'll stop yelling at you, adrenal glands. And so then that message to the adrenals kind of calms down because of the negative feedback. So then the adrenals take a break. So what we really are trying to address when we're addressing the feeling of adrenal exhaustion or brain exhaustion is actually changing ways to see stress. But then also, if we're using herbs, for example, or lifestyle changes, we're actually addressing brain stress, not adrenal stress. Because again, it's not like the thyroid that it becomes underactive. The adrenals don't become underactive unless your brain has told them to take a break. So you may see low cortisol on blood work or in saliva or in urine, which is the stress hormone that comes from the adrenal glands. But that's not because the adrenal glands crapped out. It's actually because they took a break. Just like, whereas the thyroid, you might need to replace thyroid with thyroid hormones. And I just thought I would bring that up because it's such an important concept that people don't often get, because they think I have adrenal fatigue or adrenal exhaustion. It's like, well, your adrenals are actually taking a break, which is good. It's protective.
Yes.
And even high cortisol is protective. Yes. So people don't think about that. But when you're a little bit in fight or flight and your cortisol is running high, it's not only protective, it's what drives us, but it's a bit protective. Cortisol is what kind of protects your immune system. So, when you're like studying for a big test as a student, and then you write the test and then boom, you get sick. It's because now your adrenal glands stop popping out the cortisol. You're no longer fired by cortisol. And, when you hear about corticosteroids, they're immunosuppressing. So during the time you're studying, generally you don't get sick. And it's like, once you actually do the test and you take a break, it's like, boom, that's when you get sick.
Exactly. And I love that you raised that point. And we can also refer back to the upside of stress by Kelly McGonigal. And I loved how she articulated, it's like that kind of acute stress and that fear kind of raises you and challenges you so that you can do the task at hand. So it's actually a necessity, and it's a thrival mechanism.
Yes.
The only problem is if you are continued in that state over a long time, right? And that's where the brain exhaustion comes in. And then let's speak and address the TCM perspective. So in traditional Chinese medicine, which has been around since gosh, forever. And, the first medical textbook, which is the Suwenda, and which was written like 100 or 200 BCE. And they talked and addressed a fear and how it can impact oneself. And same thing where, like, gosh, they recognize that your emotional fear can have a physiological response, even back then, which is pretty incredible. But how they articulate it may be a little different. So we look at fear as part of it resonates in the area of the kidney energy, which is like your low back area. And I don't know about you guys, but sometimes when people have fear, you can have actual physiological pains like in your low back. So sometimes when people have chronic low back pain, that can actually be accumulated stress over so much time that it can even cause something like, degenerative disc disease in the low back, which is a very common area. Like, it's really fascinating, right? Mm-hmm. And then we also talk about how, it can stagnate the energy, and then the energy gets stuck up top. So you can think about this when someone chases you down an alley or whatever. Hopefully that doesn't ever happen, but you can have that, increased raised heartbeat, and
I'll just pop out.
Yeah, I'll pop out and scare you, boo. Right. And then and you have this, like, there's a physiological reaction. And it's a contractile mode. Right. Mm-hmm. So it's good in the moment, and then it has you run. But again, on a chronic basis, it can cause a physiological, and that's where, diseases and heart disease and all those kinds of things can ensue. And so we want to, release, smooth out that flow of energy so it's not stagnated and stuck in one spot. Right?
Absolutely.
So it implies that energy gets stuck in the chest and up, and energy cannot hold down below. And we address this, right? Because when we have fear, you and we both have something going down below, right? I go pee, you go poo, right?
So you're saying that when you address it, it allows you to release? Is that what you're saying? Or is that just the release is like the reality again?
Yeah.
The reality. From a Chinese medicine perspective, you're saying that it's like it sinks, the chi sinks, like the
chi can sink. Like, normally there's this irregular, like the smooth flow of energy.
Oh, so we need to address our chi. We don't have good chi if we're dumping
all the time. No, but here's the thing. We all have predisposition. And like I said, it's normal to have acute reactions. That's fine. We just limit it.
Just the short limited. Yes.
Yeah. So I still
normally I have like, I always talk about well, I don't always talk about them. I ask patients, I'm like, so how often do you have ghost poos? And they're like, what's a ghost poo? It's like, the kind of poo that you go to the bathroom and you just, you barely see it. You flush, it sinks. It's like to the bottom, gone, comes out like a snake and barely a wipe. And I'm like, I'm always like, that's my kind of like, but when I go on podcasts or TV, it's definitely not that. So it's like it would be, if it would be a problem, you'd want to address it if your chi was sinking all the time and you were, having evacuations like
right.
So it's short-lived. It's okay. Right.
Okay. Yes, absolutely. And it's always just, and in fact, I'll read this. Okay. It says excessive fear and pensiveness will damage the Shen, and the Shen is a spirit.
Yeah.
And damaging the Shen in turn will lead to deprivation of the ability to control oneself due to fear, which is really tough because we're living in COVID, a time of fear, and we're, isolating ourselves. And that's a whole other conversation that we're going to do a deep dive into in another episode. So you'll have to watch out for that. Okay.
And what will Jing do if it's like damaged? Like if you don't have enough Jing?
Very good. So, traditionally, of course, everything was more male focused in the Chinese texts. So they talk about impotency and weakness of bones, but, obviously female counterpart that may look like, challenges with infertility. But really what it is in that moment, your body is going into protective mode. So it's not that it's wrong. Like, when a person have chronic stress and fear, and they're wondering why they're not conceiving, and then they're looking like there's a pathology, consider that sometimes it's actually not pathology at all. It's your body's protective mechanism saying, it's not a good time right now. If a lion's
Right.
chasing after you in the wild, you're not going to say, okay, let's have some sex and let's have a baby.
Not time to have an erection.
Not
So you
time.
have to be in parasympathetic nervous system mode. There's two types, right? The parasympathetic nervous system and the sympathetic nervous system. And you have to be in parasympathetic nervous system mode, which is like sit down in a chair, reading, chilling, in order to achieve an erection. And for women to be kind of receptive to be intimate. And then in order to release, you then are in sympathetic nervous system mode. So, clearly our nervous system shifts from one to the next. And if you're always in sympathetic nervous system drive, then you're going to not want to be intimate because you're stressed all the time.
That's
so
right.
It's like trying to find ways to be in that PNS mode, the parasympathetic nervous system mode.
Love it. And so I'm really noticing our time. This is so juicy.
Yeah.
Like we need to kind of shut it down, and because we're going to have to totally carry on this discussion, because we have way more notes, by the way. Like way more notes. We haven't even done half of this.
We're just so chatty patty.
Yeah, but it's so insightful, like what we're talking about, right? And so let's just give let's give a couple of tips. Let's go back to two tips, right?
2 tips, sure.
From what we have already mentioned. What did we?
We've already talked about the 5 senses, right?
Yes, love that.
So in panic and anxiety, so important, such a useful tip to send you from like that stressful amygdala fight flight state into processing. And we also talked about labeling an emotion. So making sure that you label your emotions. So instead of I am mad, because I love how Mary said it, I feel mad right now if you're mad, or I feel anxious, or I have fear, and labeling it will all of a sudden help you process it.
Yes.
And another thing you can do is if you're in, if you've had, actually it's kind of this really cool journal article that I read once, written by a psychiatrist who basically was trying to deal with post-traumatic stress disorder. And what he did was he would give medications to his patients that included a beta blocker, which slowed their heart rate right down, and give them an Ativan, which is a medication that really affects the GABA part of the brain. So the patients were super chill. And he would have them reread their written trauma, and so that they were now in kind of de-stress, calm mode, no reaction to the history, the memory of the trauma. And they would reread it over and over in that state of complete calm until when they finally didn't take the medication, they would read it and there was no positive, or I should say negative association, like emotional association with it.
So no triggering, which is
kind of interesting, right?
Yeah. So we're going to continue this conversation because we can just talk all day about this, which is so awesome. And so we will talk about this in another episode. Okay.
Sure.
And so before we close off, we always love to hang up on a high note. So let's talk about what filled your cup today or this week.
So what filled my cup this morning was I turned on the treadmill. So I got on the treadmill. I'm blessed to have a treadmill. When we moved into this house, they had a treadmill and they couldn't get it out of the basement. So they left it. It came as a package for the house. And because I injured my Achilles last year, I didn't think I'd be able to get back to running, but I'm doing my little sweet 3K runs as a starting point. And I love that I'm able to. So that filled my cup, my ability to move past my injury and do little runs to build myself back up.
Oh, love it. So before I talk about filling my cup, I just want to acknowledge that Dr. Tanya and I had been able to be a part of each other's bubble. And now since lockdown, we are now doing virtually with each other. So the quality of the podcast may not be as good as it was. And the truth today, we'll
get on it.
Yeah, we're going to get right on it. We're going to pivot, but we're already pivoting. So it's do we cancel? No. Kale, no. We're not.
Kale, no. I love your kale, no.
Kale, no.
Kale, that's Kale, the vegetable.
In case you missed that.
Just in case you missed it, yeah.
So we're still going on. And why? Because we want to make a difference in your life.
Absolutely.
So what fills my cup is that we do have this opportunity to keep going to fill other people's cups, right? And then beyond that, I want to also share that this past week, I had the privilege of doing this exercise with Dr. Stacy Thomas in Toronto, who's a psychologist, and she's doing this thing like we'll put it in the show notes. But what basically happened was on Tuesday, I sat with her live on Instagram, and she leaded us to a guided meditation. It was like 2-minute meditation. And then we were led to a 15-minute journal writing with a prompt. And she was talking about boundaries and how to basically be your best self. And it was such a beautiful act, because there's one thing, it's one thing writing by yourself and journaling, but I felt a whole different sense of energy, even though we were not doing it live. So that's what filled my cup. So I hope Dr. Stacy is watching this, and maybe you guys will go on. She does it every Tuesday. And then on Wednesday, we actually debriefed and we talked about it. And I talked exactly about that. It's like, wow, it's amazing in community, right? So
that's beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
If you liked this episode and you have been enjoying listening, please join, subscribe, go to embraceyoufirst.com and subscribe to get our updates, and share with the world, share with your friends and family. I'm sure they will benefit from the previous and the coming episodes. Thank you so much for listening.
See you guys.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us. Click subscribe, like, and share. Please comment and suggest topics you want us to cover.
Until next time, ask yourself, how are you going to embrace you first today?
For more podcasts, check out embraceyoufirst.com.
And follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube.